So hello and welcome everyone for the third edition of the Interactive Virtual Craft Fair. Today in one of our live sessions, we have Derek Matthews, the very well-known illustrator whose journey from, as the name suggests, paper to clay. So today, Derek would be speaking about his past as a well-known illustrator and also now a ceramic artist. So if you have any questions for Derek, please write that in your Q&A or chat section so I can take it with Derek. Or if you would like to ask directly, just raise your hand and then I will unmute you and then you can ask questions directly. Derek, welcome to Handmade Oxford Online Virtual Fair live sessions. Thank you for agreeing to talk about your work. I think I've been a very big fan of your work. And of course, you have been selling on Handmade in Britain website as well. So what I know about you is that you were a very, very well-known illustrator. So what made you move from illustrator to being an illustrator to a ceramic artist? But before that, please tell us a little bit about your world when you were an illustrator.
Well, anyway, well-known, nice idea. Certainly pretty busy. I'd always wanted to be an illustrator, or I called it a commercial artist, to be quite honest. But even from when I was a very small child, and I never thought of doing anything else actually. So when I left school, I went straight to art school, and then when I left art school, I started to illustrate. I worked as a designer for a very short while, but mostly I illustrated, and the work sort of kept coming in, and I discovered that actually I could keep myself going on it, and quite a few interesting jobs came my way, and I became more and more busy. I was doing lots of campaigns for companies across the world actually, and at that one particular time I was a fairly regular contributor to the Sunday Times. I used to illustrate for the money section every week, which was quite fun, because what would happen is I would get a manuscript coming in with regards to an article on a Monday. I'd supply 3 or 4 ideas for an image to go with that article by the Tuesday. I'd get the go-ahead on a Wednesday, and then complete the artwork on the Thursday for delivery on the Friday, so that it could be printed on the Sunday. So it was quite a sort of fast turnaround, and I was doing other work as well, obviously. But that was quite entertaining and good. Kept the mind really sort of working, especially as I didn't know anything about the stuff that I was actually having to illustrate. I had to bone up on it to a certain extent, but then also take a kind of completely tangential view of it to create a kind of humorous image. Anyway, while that was going on, I was approached by a publishing company to do a couple of sample illustrations for a children's book, or 2 children's books, to go out to Bologna, a book fair. I did these samples, good fun. They were going to be turned into pop-up books. I'd never done any pop-up books before, so I thought it'd be quite fun. Anyway, it turned out that actually these seemed to be quite popular. They came back from Bologna and said, oh, actually, yes, we'd like to go ahead and create complete books and things. So I worked on those 2 books, and they went into production, and amazingly, they sold in their millions. After that, I carried on working on them. In fact, so this is a typical sort of pop-up book that I would be working on, and I've worked on those for quite a few years actually. I produced probably 42 different titles, and they sold across the world with a total sale of something like 13 million copies sold worldwide. The issue with that was, of course, that actually took up most of my life, and really that was how it went on for quite a while. I did other work. I still do other work, but that has calmed down, luckily, to a certain extent. In fact, calmed down sufficiently for me to think that I ought to be doing something else. I wanted to be doing something for myself. And that's really where I got to when I decided to take up clay again. Clay was always in the background, I guess. When I was very, very small, I used to play with plasticine, modeling clay, more so than actually drawing. I used to really enjoy making little things out of plasticine. And then when I was at school, I did a fair amount of pottery there. At art school, certainly for the first 2 years, I carried on doing pottery. It just so happened that the art school I went to at Farnham in Surrey was a very good pottery art school. But I was there for a foundation course, so I did other things as well. After 2 years of that, went on and did a 3-year course of graphics in Kingston. But then later on, I don't know, 6 or 7 years later, I then took up ceramics as an evening class, simply because I quite liked to get back into it again. But then, as you can understand from what I said before, the rest of the work took over and it had to be put to one side. I never really wanted to illustrate my own work. I always felt that I was doing myself I was expressing myself best and being more effective at illustrating other people's work. I particularly enjoyed taking on other people's ideas and concepts and actually giving them back to them in a manner which they liked and which, more importantly, projected whatever it was that they were trying to project, either it's in a story or actually selling a box of cornflakes or telling how plate tectonics works. All these things and more I have illustrated and worked on. But when it came to illustration, I just didn't want to do my own thing because I got so used to second guessing it. So I had to know when I did an illustration exactly how it was going to look and when it was going to be done, and everything had to be sorted out beforehand. And it was clay that gave me the opportunities to go, well, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm hoping that this is going to turn out like this, but oh no, it's not. It's turned out slightly differently. It's got a mind of its own almost. I'm trying to work with something that's really isn't quite doing exactly what I want it to do, and it's that's so attractive for me. I can now, in a sense, fall back on this interest in narrative and in projecting an idea, but through a medium that it is such a joy to work with because it's so variable in the way in which it reacts. I can do one thing one day and then it won't happen the same the next day, and that's intentional. The materials I use, I make sure they're not that stable in a funny kind of way. I mix different clays together so that sometimes I might try and make a shape out of clay that will work perfectly well with one mixture of clay and then won't with another one. And it's just very, very satisfying and enjoying when they go into the kiln and they come out, oh, I wasn't actually really expecting that to happen. I mean, every potter will tell you that the kiln is a remarkable device. The devil's work, basically. You're setting something on fire and heating it up to crazy temperatures, and then it comes out, and it's always going to be slightly not what you expect, and unless you're doing the same thing day in, day out. And that's certainly not what I do. I work on one piece at a time. I do not tend to repeat anything. tend not to have two jobs going on at the same time either. I just start with an idea, and that's actually quite funny because, as you can see, it's quite blank here. I will begin with some various sort of narratives that I might illustrate, sketch out. I'll then think, well, I fancy making that. I'll have a go at making that, and then I'll move from my sketch pad to this workbench here, and I will almost immediately start making something completely different. I can't help it. This thing in the background here that you may or not be able to see was going to be, well, actually, it was going to be something completely different. It was going to be a very simple little, almost like a kind of monumental memento holder. But instead, it's morphed itself into a guy sitting on a goat. There's a story to this, actually. This is the third guy sitting on a goat that I've made. I call them the itinerant. It's actually based on an old piece of pottery anyway, a ceramic from the Meissen factory. In a sense, this will give you an insight into how one of the things I like is something that's got a backstory. The president of the Meissen factory had a tailor who, and he asked the tailor to produce some clothes for him in time for a banquet, and as a reward offered him what he wanted. The tailor said, well, I'd really like to come to your banquet. And the guy said, well, no, that's not really an option, I'm afraid. But what he did do was he commissioned Meissen to make a piece of pottery that was the tailor on a goat, along with his wife, the tailor's wife, on another goat, and they sat as table decorations throughout the banquet. And the translation of those, which I can't remember because it's German or Saxony, from Saxony. The translation came over to England and it became the Welsh tailor and Welsh tailor's wife. And it was recreated by Staffordshire potters. And I just rather liked the idea of that it had got sort of twisted already in history. So I twisted it again. And I'm every so often, this is the third one I've made, I will make an itinerant, a Welsh tailor. I've never made the Welsh tailor's wife, actually, but by the time I've got this out of my system, I tend to think, oh, don't want to make another goat. Oh, that's enough goats for now. But that's really how I work. Another one I've got here, which is a finished piece, and it's in fact just gone onto Handmade. I made it a little while ago. This is called the Eam Road. Perhaps see it just down here. I started out by trying to thinking, oh, I know, I'll do an Aesop's fable. That's a good starting point. You know, there are lots of different stories. I've quite fancied the idea of the fox and the crow. The story is that the crow takes some cheese and the fox cheats him out of the cheese. I wanted to work out how to do this. I thought, yes, I have the crow sitting on a fox. And then I remembered that a crow mask was worn by plague doctors during the bubonic plague in Great Britain. And so I changed the crow into being a sort of half crow, half human crow doctor. With so he's got the crow mask and the top hat. And while I was doing this, I thought, well, I'll just look at a bit more background on this. And I discovered to my amazement that that Eam, which is a minute little village in Derbyshire, was famous in the bubonic plague for cutting itself off from the rest of civilization to avoid spreading the plague. Strangely poignant thing at the moment, and thereby saved a lot of lives, even though a lot of lives were lost in the village. And Eyam is in the centre of a very good cheese making centre in this country, and so suddenly I've got a complete connection. The Eyam Valley and the Eyam village is known for cheese, and the story originally started out about cheese. So that's a great source of satisfaction for me to discover that I can combine all of that into a piece of pottery. It doesn't always happen. I mean, sometimes I just fancy making something. For example, Fisherman's Friend, which I hope you can see, which is just gone into the auction, is the style is called a pieta. It's very much based on a religious style, and I've made a few of these over the years, always completely different. But I just really like the way in which it sort of works as an image, as a piece. I tend to make pieces with flat backs. Not always, but that's one of the things I quite like making. It's a nod to Staffordshire pottery, although having said flatbacks, all the other two that I've just showed you aren't flatbacks, they're fully formed three-dimensional things. The way I work is quite strange, I suppose, in the fact that I mix clays together to make them a bit unstable. I also throw in a few other bits and pieces. In fact, I've actually got a jar full of rust, which I put in, and I put in ash and stuff like that. I then roll the clay out flat into thin sheets like this. And then I work out what I'm going to make. So for example, this, I can't move the goat because it's too soft, but the goat, I then think, well, I think I know what I'm going to make. So I'll cut a piece of paper to form a template, because then I can bend the paper to give me an idea that will work as in clay. So I tend to do that with all sorts of things. I don't use templates in the sense that, right, the next time I make a goat, I'm going to use that template. That template will go. The only reason that template existed was just to make sure that that shape would work. In the same way as the guy's arm hanging on to the horn, I need to make sure when I was putting it together that it would work, that it fitted, and it's easier to cut it out of paper and then check it and then make it out of clay than to just make it out of clay and then discover that it's the wrong size, and then you just, that's the way I work. So it's a very unusual way of working. I don't mold clay very often. I tend to bend clay and cut it, which I suppose is a nod back to the pop-up book days. I think pop-ups gave me the opportunity to actually turn 2 dimensions into 3 dimensions, and I'm carrying on that way of working here. That is more or less how it all functions. After I've made the thing, it then sits around in my drying cupboard behind me over there. And because I would actually work on one piece at a time, it's quite funny because it can take me quite a while to make a piece. And when I go to the drying cupboard, I think, oh, I'd forgotten all about the fact that I'd made that. So I'm looking at pieces afresh all the time. I don't. So my process is definitely not, I come up with an image that I'm drawing, I know I'll turn that into 3 dimensions. That's what it's going to be like. That's what it's like. There we are, finished. I'll start here, and I'll go there, and then there. Oh no, I'm going to change that, change this. Oh no, I'll change this. It'll be a different color. It'll be a different shape. All the time, I'm forever changing things. The exact opposite of the straight line, start to finish, of my illustrative work that I did for 40 years. And that's where I am now. Thoroughly enjoying myself, totally immersed in clay. And though I don't do it all the time, because it just takes up a lot of time, otherwise the world goes by when I'm working on clay. I don't know what time of the day it is. I'm just working. I'm in here trying to make things happen. And that is about where I'm up to. So over to you, Piyush. Any questions?
Yes, many. I'm sure a lot of people have many questions. Very, very fascinating, I must say that. So
thank you.
So regarding the stories, of course, you were talking about the stories. So when you are illustrating on a piece of paper, and when you say that you're, if you don't go from point A to B, you might go to A, D, C, X, B, and then reach B probably. So yeah. You start with a story in mind, or your story also changes? The narrative also changes while
it changes. It can come from anywhere. In some cases, a story might come up with a character, or not so much a character. I'll call it a character, but shall we say a central core. But that might then springboard off to another story or something. I mean, I do a lot of sort of random research into various global religions and prehistoric religions and folk stories, folklore, and so consequently, I might find, for example, a story from Norse mythology. And I'll start to work on that. I think I've got an idea for an object now that, yeah, I'd like to do this. But then at the last minute, it just might be that there'll be perhaps something in that makes me remember something that I was perhaps going to make another day and then didn't, and then that might come into the mix. So it's there's a word, a palimpsest. I think that's the right word. Anyway, it's used. It comes from illuminated manuscripts. The very best illuminated manuscripts was done on vellum, and if the illuminator made a mistake, he would scratch. You can scratch back through vellum, but if you were paying top dollar for your illuminated manuscript, you wouldn't want anyone with scratched back vellum. You wouldn't want any pages like that in your manuscript. So that piece of vellum would be put to one side for the next level down. So the next level down guides illumination gets done, and I made a mistake again. I'll scratch that back. I'll give that to someone else. And of course, what happens is that there's always a little bit of an image left over, a little bit of detail still in that vellum, and that builds up, and that's called a palimpsest, and that's really how I work. This, if you know what I mean, it's sort of lots of little things slowly bubbling to the surface until eventually I look at this overlaying structure, shall we say, of interlaced different ideas, and somebody goes, oh, there's one idea there, I'll go for that. And so that's what I do. Does that answer the question? Yes,
it does. Yeah. It does. One of the other questions which I had in mind was looking at your work. Obviously, now I'm very familiar with a lot of your pieces. Your colors are very muted, and I also noticed that your background, in your studio, there's so much lack of colors.
Yes.
And you do talk about folk stories and mythology. And if you look at mythology from different parts of the world, the colors have generally been very bright, because they have been using, if you go back, they have been very bright colors. They've been taking colors from, natural materials.
Yeah.
So why are your colors so muted, especially when your stories are so bright and vivid? And, is there a particular reason to that?
Well, it could be a knock-on effect from the fact that I used to use incredibly bright colours when I illustrated. But for me, I like this. I like the earthiness of it. I like this. I like the real sort of the earth quality to it. Fire and earth. That's what I enjoy. I mean, interesting enough, I had some work in an exhibition recently, and I was talking to the curator, and she was saying it was quite unusual in the fact that she was noticing that all the colours were very subdued, and then one evening she went in with certain light on in the gallery, and all the colours come out. They just glow ever so slightly in the work. I use wax to finish things. I don't have gloss finishes on anything. I don't think. I might have one. I mean, never say never. But I tend to just finish things with a wax, and so that actually again creates the impression of a very subdued color. And I don't know. I just rather like it. I like that sort of you've got to look at it a bit more quality to it. But definitely it's this earth and fire thing I particularly like. So who knows? Few more years down the line, I might be making incredibly bright colours, but I doubt it. I like it the way it is, actually. Especially the fact that because I do multiple firings as well, it's not so. And I'm not using glazes, I use oxides, which are naturally more subdued. So again, this much more naturalistic quality to it. Yeah, that's really, I hope, answers the question about the subdued colors.
Yes. So you said that you just make one piece. You start with one piece, you finish it, and then you start with the other piece.
From the making point of view.
Yes.
Yeah, because obviously the making is just part of it. With clay, it'll go away, it'll dry, and then there'll probably be a bit of finishing before it then goes to have its first firing. And I might sometimes I even colour my work before it's fired. And then it'll be fired and it'll come out, and then I'll respond in some way to the colours that it's come out from the kiln, add extra colour, subtly add, or maybe I've even put things in bonfires before now just to get the right effect. And then it'll go back for another firing, and then they'll come out, and then they might need more adjusting, and then they'll have another firing, come back, and some pieces I don't know how many times I've fired them, but that's how it works. So at that stage, obviously, I have got other pieces going on, because I don't just put one piece in a kiln. I wait till I've got 3 or 4 pieces to put into a kiln, and then I'll fire those. But yeah, normally it's one piece. I'll be working on that till that's completely modelled, and then it'll go away, and I'll start on something else, which I haven't decided what yet. But I quite fancy something to do with a guy called Percy Pilcher, who, if he hadn't have unfortunately died in a plane crash, would have been the first person. Well, would have actually been the first person to have achieved powered flight. An Englishman. He would have done it about a year or so before the Wright brothers. So I always feel that he's a sort of hero who needs some kind of little monument. He's got a monument actually somewhere, but I'd like to make a clay one, so that he might be next. Yeah.
Do you have any piece which is your favorite, absolute favorite, something which you can remember and you have a story to tell?
A favorite. Interesting. they're all my favorites at one moment in time. There's another piece where they're usually my favorites for different reasons. Sometimes they're my favorites because they have been so good to me. They have worked all the way through. They went together well. They came out of the kiln just right, and they just look right. And so that's my favorite for them. But there are others that have just got a great story that I just like. There's another piece I've got that's it's called, I forgot what it's called now. It's called Tilsit. I'm sorry, I'm looking over there. It's called Tilsit, and it commemorates Napoleon and the signing of the Tilsit treaties, and it actually commemorates his possibly the most embarrassing defeat. He after the signing of the Tilsit treaties, whatever they were, I've got no idea. During the Napoleonic Wars, one of his sort of second in command decided to organise a rabbit shoot by way of a sort of entertaining thing to do after the signing, and managed to get hold of 1,000 or so rabbits. And the idea was that Napoleon and all his mates would gather around with their guns and shoot these rabbits. Unbeknown to anyone was the fact that this guy couldn't get hold of wild rabbits, so he got hold of domestic rabbits. And so when these 1,000 or so rabbits were let loose, instead of running away so that the guys could run after and shoot them, they ran straight towards Napoleon and his cohorts. And in the end, Napoleon had to seek refuge in a coach to get away from these rabbits. And I've made a piece based on that. So at the moment, that's possibly one of my favourites, along with, say, the Ian Roden, the Fisherman's Friend here. Yeah.
Please tell us a little bit more about Fisherman's Friend, because that was my next question, actually.
Right. Yes. Well, so it's Fisherman's Friend. It features a fisherman that, well, actually, yes. So this here, I don't like to completely tell the story. I like to give you the opportunity to interpret it as you want. Someone once said that a book is written twice, once by the author and again by the reader, and I'm a great believer in that. I think that I need to. So that's why some of my work doesn't necessarily have an actual story behind it, but what it is I'm trying to put the possibility of a story forward, and this is an example of that. We have here a mermaid, although got a cat's head. I don't know why. It's just, that's what I fancy doing. And the drunken sailor, is he a drunken sailor? Has he passed out? Is he in raptures at this love affair with this mermaid? There's a little bottle down here. Is that a clue? It's difficult to tell. So that's what I like to do with various pieces. And this one, I'm rather pleased with this one, I must admit. The colours have worked out rather well. You might think they're a bit subdued, but I think they're spot on here. They look quite nice, actually. Nice details here I've got with the fish scales. I'm rather pleased with those. And it looks, as most of my things do, a bit like it's probably being dug up from somewhere. So yeah, it's finished with wax. Yeah. So I hope, does that help? Or have I been far too enigmatic?
I think Enigma is good, and as you said, I think viewers can create their own story, and of course,
Yeah,
the more you look at your the more we look at your pieces, the more stories. Now, you know, I will never be able to look at your pieces ever again in the same way. You know?
yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. I made a piece quite a few years ago. It was again, it was a kind of piece that made itself. I just started making something. I started to make a little donkey. And then it ended up with an owl on its back. After I'd done it, I suddenly thought, I wonder why the owl was on the back of the donkey. What was it for? And I decided that it was perhaps, the donkey couldn't see very well and the owl couldn't fly very well. And sort of together they made this little partnership. And so, the narrative came after the piece. Yes, good. I hope that people do exactly as you say. Take a piece and create their own story around it.
Well, you have a great following. I mean, not only in UK but also in US. I can tell from the first-hand experience, obviously. Thank you so much. And I think if everybody would like to ask any questions, the floor is open. I think you were such a great speaker, I'm sure there were a couple of questions already written, and then it was that you had already covered those points. Well, I think there are no questions. So thank you so much.
That's all right.
For agreeing to talk about your work and sharing your stories. Very, very fascinating. And
thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.